And when I've talked a lot in these videos about different kinds of theists, atheists, monotheists, pantheists, henotheists, and talked about the different definitions, even apatheists, people who don't care about the question about whether or not there's a God. But I wonder if there is a type of theist called an ambitheist, somebody who both believes that there is and isn't God. And if I might be one of those. So in my kind of journey of exploring all of this, post being part of the Abrahamic faiths, Christian, and wanting to throw everything out and start all over again, like René Descartes throwing all the apples out of the basket and seeing which ones are still useful to put back in. I wonder if ambitheist might be a really good place to go next in exploring that. So what do I mean by ambitheist? So let me start with Spinoza then. And I'm going to put this crudely. I've started to read Spinoza, and I confessed to a friend, an academic over in Chicago, that I find Spinoza really difficult to read. And I was so pleased to hear that he also found that as well. For us non-mathematicians, people like Spinoza are just... Anyway, Spinoza, he challenged the idea of dualism, that there is both spirit and material world. And he talked about a kind of a non-dualism or a monism, that everything is one, and that everything we experience around us is really an extension and a moving outwards from the one substance that is everything, that our minds and our bodies are not separate. And if they were separate, that would be a problem, because like, how do they connect with each other? If our mind and our bodies were separate things, then what's the bridge between the two? Is it some third thing that's neither substance nor spirit, or is it some kind of blend? Like it asks more questions than it answers. So for Spinoza, everything is one. Our mind is not separate from our bodies, our material world, and the spirit and the material are not separate things, but we as humans are simply a way for the universe to be extended out, the one substance to extend itself out momentarily. And we're just that, like a wave in an ocean. We rise up and we fall down. We at the moment appear as this thing, as this personhood. But eventually we will subside into everything else and rise up in some other way. But there is only one thing, and that is everything. And so Spinoza talks about God and nature as being the same thing. And you could call Spinoza then a pantheist, somebody who believes everything is God. But of course, if everything is God, then nothing is God. And you could hold both of those positions at the same time, that everything is God and nothing is God. And that would be this ambitheism, holding together both of those beliefs. And I think that works for me anyway, because if I talk about there being a God, I end up encumbered with all of these Abrahamic, these monotheistic faith ideas of God, which I really find unhelpful and unhealthy in many ways. For example, we end up with the idea that God is person, that God has personhood, personality, views, judgments, characteristics, and feelings. And that's something that I now reject completely. And so this ambitheism allows me to continue to reject that idea while still holding to this otherness. But there's not completely otherness, that's also sameness. It also holds us to this idea, which I see with a lot of atheists. And I found out making these videos, that atheists get really tetchy, some of them, about this idea, that they continue as atheists to hold to some ideas of monotheism. They're like, no, there's only one thing about an atheist, and that's that we don't believe in God. And they don't see the context. It's really interesting to watch people react to the idea that as atheists, they're still hung up on their ex. You know, like they may have rejected the idea of God, but they still like some of God's greatest hits, like the idea that there is a universal idea of morality, that there is such a thing as good and evil. Like those are monotheistic ideas. Those are Abrahamic faith ideas. Those are not the ideas that atheists should still be holding on to. Or the idea that there is such a thing as natural order of the universe, that we can say that gravity is always the same and always can be measured, that what we learn about light and how it works and how it travels is the same, and we can measure it and we can find order in the universe. Talking about laws in physics, these are, I think, monotheistic ideas, because habits can change over time, can change from one day to the next. Whereas if we talk about physics as having laws, then we're using an analogy, and it is an analogy of the universe that is very monotheistic. It's very like laws are made by judges, right? Or by law courts and imposed by judges. And we're getting into this personhood idea of the universe again. And so if you want to be an atheist, you can't say that there are laws of physics. You can only really say that there are habits. And even then you're using an analogy, but I think it's a better one. It's a more useful one. And it's more open to the idea of change. And we have to be more open to that as we get more into quantum mechanics, as we learn more about how the universe behaves very differently at the quantum scale than it does at the kind of, like we have to shake off Newton a little bit, Newton and Einstein and all these other physicists and say, look, we've learned that everything isn't what we thought it was. And so the realm of quantum mechanics and quantum physics, which I'm not pretending to understand, by the way, opens us up to the idea that we are wrong about everything we thought we knew about the physical universe, or at least wrong about thinking we'd figured any of it out, because it all is up in the air again. That we have superposition, the idea that there can be two things true at once, the idea that there is this huge uncertainty in every given moment. Everything is up in the air. And we've got these philosophers as well, people like Roger Penrose up the road in Oxford, who talk about quantum consciousness, who raise the idea, and within science as well as philosophy, raise the idea that there is such a thing as quantum consciousness, that everything, the material world, the immaterial world, whatever you want to call it, is conscious at a quantum level. And as it scales up and that consciousness becomes more complicated, humans are somewhere along that scaling up. And that our consciousness is consciousness because of quantum consciousness. We're just a scaled up version, a more complex version of that. There are other people who think about cosmic consciousness, the idea that all things have a consciousness, and that as you scale down to humans, there is a type of consciousness. And I wonder if we are, like, both might be true, that there is a consciousness to the universe, or to the all things, or to the monism, to nature, to what Spinoza calls nature. There's a consciousness to that cosmic thing, and to the quantum thing, and that we are somewhere where those two things meet. And they meet in other places, like we're not the center of that. I'm not suggesting that. But our consciousness is because of some other quantum and cosmic consciousness. And that still doesn't take us to the monotheistic idea of God with personhood, with an awareness and a character who's making laws, who has self-interest. All of that we can discard, I think, quite happily, while still saying with Simone Weil, there is a God, there is no God. What is the problem? But one more thing, and I thought I'd have finished this video by now, but there's so much to pack into this idea. It excites me so much. There's an idea which most of us observe and I think can agree on, which is the sum is always greater than the parts. Like even when we talk about a team of people solving a problem, or at just any scale, the sum is greater than the parts. And I think there is a sumness or a Sum-Thing-ness, which is all of everything, as Spinoza would call it, nature. But I want to extend that idea that the whole of everything, the universe, if you want to call it that, or nature, to follow Spinoza, but everything across all of time and all of space, there is a sum of that. And that sum of all things is greater than the parts. And that sumness, that something, that I am happy to call God. I'm happy to say that that is God, the sum which is greater than the parts, and to see spirituality as an attempt to connect my partness with that sumness, to become more aware of that. And I think we see that as well in like the ancient faiths of Buddhism and of Taoism, and to some extent Hinduism, that awareness that there is an all thingsness, that, and our job is partly to allow ourselves to be separate to that, but also to be aware that we are not at all separate from any of that. And that's a spirituality that I think we can all get on board with. Those people who believe in a God and those who don't, and those who are ambitheists, who would say with Simone Weil, God exists, God does not exist. What is the problem? Before you go, Like and subscribe below wherever it is. Press that subscribe button because I want to produce more videos on this and hear your views and get you to comment and to start a conversation with me about this, and so we can learn and find out about our own spirituality for people of all faiths and good faith together in this space. So please like, subscribe, comment, get involved. Thanks.